Imagine it's December 7th, 1982. Moscow is locked in iron winter. Snow whips sideways across the streets like it's trying to erase every footprint. A black Volga sedan slips out of the American embassy compound just after dusk. Inside sits a CIA officer at the wheel, his wife in the back holding what looks like a homemade birthday cake on her lap. All smiles, all chatter, like any diplomatic family heading to a friend's party. But this isn't a party. The car turns the corner. The moment the KGB tail car loses line of sight for 3 heartbeats, the passenger door cracks open. The tall American in a heavy coat rolls out onto the frozen sidewalk, hits the ground running low, and disappears into the shadows. At the exact same instant, the wife in the back presses a hidden switch. The cake lid pops open, and a life-sized cardboard cutout of the missing man springs up. Perfect silhouette, perfect hairline, staring blankly out the window exactly where the real officer had been. The Jack in the Box. One of the CIA's most audacious Moscow tricks, and it worked. That officer sprinting through the back alleys in a cheap Russian disguise, heart hammering so hard his glasses fogged inside his mask, was heading to meet the single most valuable human asset the United States ever ran inside the Soviet Union. His name was Adolf Georgievich Tolkachev, and the secrets he was about to hand over would be worth more than $1 billion. This is the story of the man who walked into the heart of the Soviet military machine, photographed its deepest secrets in a filthy office toilet, and single-handedly rewrote the balance of air power for an entire decade. All while knowing that one wrong glance, one missed signal, one suspicious colleague would end with a bullet in the back of his head. Welcome to the billion-dollar spy. Adolf Tolkachev was born on January 6, 1927, in the dusty steppe town of Aktyubinsk, deep in the Kazakh Soviet Socialist Republic. His family moved to Moscow when he was 2. By the time he was a teenager, the Great Terror had already scarred the nation. But the wound that never healed for Tolkachev wasn't his own. It was his wife's. Natalia Kuzmina, Natasha, was the love of his life. They married when he was 30. She was an antenna specialist working in the same world of classified electronics. But Natasha carried ghosts. In 1938, during the height of Stalin's purges, her mother was executed, shot. Her father disappeared into the Gulag for 17 years. When he finally stumbled home in 1955, broken and sick, he died soon after. Tolkachev never forgot the way Natasha's eyes went hollow when she spoke of it. Those 2 graves were the fuel. Every time he walked past the portraits of Lenin and Stalin in the Institute corridors, every time he heard the propaganda on the radio about the glorious Soviet system, he felt the same cold rage. By the mid-1970s, that rage had turned into calculation. Life in Brezhnev's Moscow was gray, suffocating, and humiliating. Empty shelves, endless queues for sausage and toilet paper, a 2-room apartment shared with his wife and teenage son, Oleg. Tolkachev was a senior designer at the Phasotron Scientific Research Institute, the crown jewel of Soviet airborne radar development. He designed the eyes of the MiG-29, the MiG-31, the brand new Su-27. He knew exactly how Soviet fighters were supposed to see, lock on, and kill NATO aircraft in the next war. And he decided the next war wasn't going to go the way the Kremlin planned. In January 1977, on a bitter evening, Tolkachev made his first move. The CIA Moscow station chief was filling up his diplomatic-plated car at a gas station reserved for foreigners. A middle-aged man in a plain coat walked straight up to the window. "Are you American?" Before the chief could answer, a folded note slid across the seat. "I wish to discuss matters of mutual interest on a strictly confidential basis." The chief drove away stunned. The note was polite, precise, and terrifyingly bold. Inside, Tolkachev had listed his credentials: optical mechanical radar training, graduate of Kharkov Polytechnical Institute, current position as leading designer at a top-secret laboratory. The CIA suspected a KGB dangle, a provocation designed to flush out case officers or feed disinformation. They watched. They waited. Tolkachev tried again and again. 5 separate approaches over 14 months, each time more desperate, more detailed. Finally, on March 1st, 1978, he caught Station Chief Gus Hathaway and his wife getting into their car near the embassy. Another note. This one included his full name, birth date, workplace, even his wife's maiden name and the story of her parents' destruction. He signed it simply, Adolf Tolkachev. The CIA spent the next 2 years running every background check they could without alerting the KGB. They tested him with dead drops, invisible ink, one-time pads. Slowly, they began to believe this man was real. In August 1978, they left him his first spy kit hidden inside a construction glove behind a phone booth near his apartment. A miniature Pentax camera, film, carbon paper, encryption materials. On New Year's Day 1979, when KGB surveillance teams were hungover and lazy, they finally met face to face. John Gilsher, an American-born Russian speaker, waited in a freezing park. Tolkachev walked up calm as winter itself. No nervous glances, no shaking hands. He simply handed over the first rolls of film and said, almost conversationally, "I am a dissident at heart." That night, the CIA realized they had just been handed the keys to the Soviet Air Force's future. Over the next few years, the operation settled into a deadly rhythm. Tolkachev would signal he was ready by moving a curtain in his apartment window. The CIA would answer by turning on a specific desk lamp in the American embassy that was visible from his building. Simple, elegant, terrifyingly exposed. When the signal was green, Tolkachev would slip out at night, usually after telling Natasha he was going for a walk or visiting a friend. He would photograph hundreds of pages of classified documents in a cramped toilet stall on a different floor of his institute, the only place with decent light and enough privacy. Then he would meet his handler in the shadows of a Moscow side street for 25 minutes exactly, hand over the film, receive new instructions, money, gadgets, and the latest Beatles or Led Zeppelin cassettes for his son. He asked for very little for himself, a Sony Walkman for Oleg, some Western books, medicines his doctor couldn't get in the Soviet Union, and one thing that chilled every handler who heard it, a suicide pill, a tiny vial of cyanide hidden inside a fountain pen, just in case. By 1980, the flood of intelligence was overwhelming. In one meeting alone, he delivered 179 rolls of film, over 6,000 pages, complete technical manuals on the new look-down, shoot-down radars for the MiG-25 and MiG-31, schematics for the R-27 air-to-air missile that would arm the Su-27, jam resistance test results, future development plans stretching into the 1990s, even the radar cross-section data that told the Americans exactly how detectable every new Soviet fighter would be. American engineers read the material and literally stopped what they were doing. The entire electronics package for the F-15 Eagle, a $70 million program, was ripped apart and redesigned from the ground up because Tolkachev had proven the Soviet radars were better than anyone in the Pentagon had feared. The U.S. Air Force began building electronic countermeasures that would blind those exact systems years before they even entered full squadron service. And the price tag of all that saved research and development? The Air Force quietly calculated more than $2 billion. $2 billion. That's why, inside Langley, they started calling him the billion-dollar spy. But running an agent this valuable inside the most surveilled city on Earth is like dancing on a razor blade. By 1982, the pressure was mounting. Tolkachev had missed several meetings. The station was getting nervous. They needed a new handler who could re-establish contact without getting burned. They chose a young, former Navy pilot named Bill Plunkett. Plunkett was tall, confident, and terrified the first time he prepared to meet Tolkachev. He spent weeks rehearsing the Jack-in-the-Box escape in the embassy basement. On the night of December 7th, 1982, he climbed into that Volga with the fake birthday cake and the cardboard version of himself waiting in the trunk. When he finally slipped out and made it to the meeting site, heart still racing, he found Tolkachev waiting exactly where he was supposed to be. Calm, disciplined, almost professorial. They shook hands like old colleagues. Plunkett would later say the man had ice water in his veins. For the next 3 years, the operation ran like a Swiss watch. 21 meetings total, mountains of film. Tolkachev even started smuggling actual documents out using a forged building pass the CIA technical branch had fabricated for him. He photographed them at home on his kitchen table, while Natasha and Oleg slept in the next room. He never told his family, not once. He kept the money, hundreds of thousands of rubles over the years, the equivalent of millions today, hidden in the apartment. He spent some on better food, better clothes for Oleg, English lessons, but mostly he just kept working, kept photographing, kept feeding the CIA's technical intelligence machine. Every time he walked back into Phasotron the next morning and sat down at his drawing board, he knew the systems he was helping perfect were already obsolete in the West. He knew American pilots were training against the exact weaknesses he had revealed, and he smiled quietly behind his glasses, because every blueprint he copied was another knife in the heart of the system that had murdered his wife's mother and destroyed her father. By late 1984, Tolkachev could feel the walls closing in. There had been an investigation at the Institute. Nothing direct, but enough to make him burn his spy kit in the bathroom sink and carry the cyanide pen in his pocket every single day. He told Plunkett at their next meeting, "If they come for me, I will not be taken alive." The Americans begged him to slow down, to take a break, to let the heat die. Tolkachev refused. He had one more delivery, one more set of documents on the next generation radar for the Su-27. He never got the chance to hand it over, because somewhere across the ocean, in the corridors of Langley itself, a traitor was already talking. The year was 1985. A former CIA trainee named Edward Lee Howard had been cut loose, fired for failing polygraphs, petty theft, deception. Bitter and broke, he reached out to the Soviet embassy. He offered what he knew, and what he knew included Adolf Tolkachev. Howard had been read into parts of the case during his training. He knew enough to point the KGB in the right direction. On the evening of June 13th, 1985, CIA officer Paul Stombaugh stepped out to what should have been a routine brush pass. He waited at the agreed spot. He never saw Tolkachev. Instead, more than a dozen KGB officers erupted from the bushes. They slammed him to the ground, cuffed him, searched him. In his pockets, miniature cameras, thousands of rubles, architectural drawing pens for Oleg, periodontal medicine. They bundled him into a van and sped to Lubyanka. Stombaugh gave them nothing. Eventually, after diplomatic pressure, they released him. But the message was clear. Tolkachev had been compromised. Tolkachev was arrested while returning to Moscow from the countryside. KGB Lieutenant Colonel Vladimir Zaitsev led the operation. They took him quietly. No dramatic chase, no shootout. Just cuffs, a black Volga, and the long ride to Lefortovo prison. Inside those walls, the interrogation began. Tolkachev didn't break easily. He was 58 years old. A man who had spent years steeling himself for this moment. He carried the cyanide pen every day, but when the time came, he didn't use it. He confessed, not out of fear, but out of exhaustion. He detailed 7 years of espionage, hundreds of rolls of film, thousands upon thousands of pages, the radar secrets, the missile guidance, the electronic warfare countermeasures, all of it. He never expressed regret. In his final statements, he spoke calmly about why he had done it, the purges. Natasha's mother executed in 1938, her father broken in the camps, the gray suffocation of Soviet life, the propaganda that rang hollow every morning on the factory floor. He had chosen revenge, quiet, precise, devastating. The trial came swiftly, a closed military tribunal, charged with high treason in the form of espionage. On September 24, 1986, Adolf Georgievich Tolkachev was executed by firing squad. He was 59. TASS announced it weeks later, a brief item. A staff worker at a Moscow research institute, exposed as a CIA agent, convicted, appeal denied, sentence carried out. Natalia Ivanova Kuzmina, was arrested too. She had known, not from the beginning, but later. Tolkachev had confessed to her sometime in the early 1980s. She had begged him to stop, not out of loyalty to the regime, but out of terror for their son, for their quiet life. He had promised her he would quit. He lied. When the KGB came, they took her as well, charged with complicity and high treason. She spent 3 years in prison, humiliated, interrogated, isolated. Their son Oleg, the boy who loved architecture, English music, Western books, was left to navigate the wreckage. He was 19 when his father disappeared. Suddenly, the whispers at the institute, the stares in the hallways, the apartment searched, possessions seized. Oleg survived. Today, he is a respected architect in Moscow. After her release, Natasha reached out, quietly, carefully, to the Americans. There was still money owed. Tolkachev had accumulated a fortune in rubles and dollars, hidden away. She asked for what was left, for her, for Oleg. The response was silence. The CIA, burned by the compromise, wary of any further contact, did not reply. Natasha felt abandoned, angry, not at her husband's cause, but at the risk he had forced on them all, and at the country that had used him and then left her to the wolves. Inside CIA headquarters at Langley, there is a corridor few outsiders see. On the wall hangs a single portrait, the only one of a foreign agent ever displayed there. It is Adolf Tolkachev, not idealized, not heroic in the Hollywood sense, just a quiet man in glasses, looking directly at the camera. A radar engineer who walked into hell with open eyes and changed the course of air power. The intelligence he provided didn't just save billions in R&D. It reshaped fighter aircraft design. It informed stealth programs. It gave American pilots the edge against Soviet-built systems that once seemed unbeatable. The Su-27, the MiG-29, the MiG-31, platforms Tolkachev helped perfect, met Western counterparts in exercises, and came up short. Not because Soviet engineers were incompetent, but because every vulnerability had already been mapped, every countermeasure pre-deployed. $2 billion saved, perhaps more. An entire generation of air superiority bought with microfilm and midnight meetings. Tolkachev never asked to be a hero. He asked for very little: music for his son, medicine, a suicide pill just in case. He did it for rage, for justice, for the ghosts of a family destroyed long before he ever picked up a camera. In the end, the system he hated claimed him, but it could not erase what he had done. So the next time you see an F-15 or F-22 slice through the sky, remember the man who helped make sure it would always see the enemy first. Adolf Tolkachev, the billion-dollar spy.